Hey guys, I'm Sunika. In today's photography tutorial, we are going to talk about the Gestalt theory and how we can use it to compose our photographs. Another composition technique. If you like my video guys, give me a big thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. And now enjoy the video. Hey guys, I'm Sonika. Today we're going to talk about the Gestalt theory. It's more of a psychology theory rather than a straight up photography composition one. But we can definitely use it while composing our shots. The theory states that we tend to perceive entire patterns or configurations rather than individual entities. Meaning, when our subject is a group, we begin to perceive the group as one and may not see them as individual elements. For example, here we see a circle rather than the lines that it is made up of. For example, in a song, we hear the melody first and then begin to separate the different notes in the song. So far with me, it's simple. It clearly states that when we see a group of objects, we tend to perceive the group first and then the individual components of the group. And now we're going to talk about some principles of the Gestalt theory that will help us in understanding this psychology. The law of proximity states that when an individual looks at an assortment of objects, they tend to perceive the objects that are close to each other as a group. For example, in the figure, we perceive the collection of circles in groups. Specifically, we perceive that there is a group of circles to the left and 3 groups of circles on the right of the image.
For example, we have a flock of black-tailed godwits flying here, but since one of them is flying ahead, we perceive the rest as a group and this one godwit separate from the group.
The law of similarity states that when an individual looks at an assortment of objects, they tend to perceive the objects that are similar to each other to be a group. That similarity can be on the basis of shape, color, shading, or any other attribute. For example, the figure illustrates circles at equal distance apart from one another. We perceive the dark circles as grouped together and the light circles as grouped together.
For example, here, since all the items sold by the shopkeeper are golden in color, we think of them as a group of items even though each item is of a varied shape and form. That also makes the shopkeeper stand out.
The law of closure states that humans tend to perceive objects as complete rather than focusing on the gaps that the object may contain. For example, here we will perceive an incomplete circle as a complete circle. That tendency to complete shapes and figures is called closure.
For example, we can perceive the shape of Ganpati Bappa here first, and then we understand that these are a bunch of almonds, since we have been programmed to believe that such a shape represents Lord Ganesha.
The law of simplicity states that when we are presented with a set of ambiguous or complex objects, our brain will tend to simplify them as much as possible.
For example, here this hill is made up of so many roads, trees, there's so much, but our brain will tend to see only one hill.
The law of symmetry states that when two symmetrical objects are placed far from each other, our brain tends to connect them into a group nevertheless. For example, here, even though the brackets are placed at a distance from each other, our minds perceive them as connected as they are symmetrical in appearance.
For example, here we can see the 2 men standing and hardly notice the tree.
The law of continuity states that we perceive objects as lines following a smooth path of motion. We tend to assume the trend of motion based on the path that the object is on. For example, we can mentally make out the path of each dotted line even when their color changes.
For example, we know that the fencing does not stop with this point but extends beyond, and we can imagine it stretching all across the place.
The law of past experience states that under certain circumstances, we tend to perceive objects based on our past experience or programming. For example, if an individual reads an English word they have never seen before, they use the law of past experience to interpret an alphabet that exists rather than an altogether different alphabet.
Perfect example for this can be silhouettes. We know this is the shape of a bird, so we can visualize a bird sitting on this branch.
The law of common region states that when elements are located in the same closed area, we tend to perceive them as belonging to a single group. For example, the circles are right next to each other, so that the dot at the end of one circle is actually closer to the dot at the end of the neighboring circle. But despite how close these dots are, we see the dots inside the circles as belonging together.
For example, the horizon has kind of created two groups in this image, the birds flying and the ones reflected. Though they are close to each other, they still appear different.
The figure ground principle states that we instinctively perceive objects as either being in the foreground or in the background. So the objects will either tend to stand out in the foreground or recede into the back.
For example, here we can distinctively see the boys in the foreground and then look at the other elements in the scene even when they are in the same focal plane as the boys.
So guys, this was the Gestalt theory and how you can use it to compose your photographs. It may be a bit complicated, but once you get the knack of it, I'm sure it will help you in enhancing the creativity and thought in your photos. And in case you like this and found it to be useful, give me a big thumbs up. Leave a comment down below about which composition techniques you want me to cover next on my channel. Share this video with your friends and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Also turn on the bell icon to be notified whenever I post new videos. Here is my previous composition tutorial. Please go check it out guys. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for more such videos every Wednesday on my channel. Bye.